And we are beginning with redrawing district lines. House members are set to return to Columbia in 2 weeks on Wednesday, December 1st, to take up the controversial issue. Let's find out what's going on now at our State House Insiders. Antoine Seawright, our Democratic strategist, Dave Wilson, our Republican strategist. Antoine, there's a lot of people out there not happy with the redrawing of these district lines. Tell me why.
The reason people are not happy is because representatives decide who they represent versus the people deciding who their representative are, usually in that case. And we call that in politics gerrymandering. That's been a thing all around the country, cycle after cycle, 10 years after 10 years. And I don't see that process changing based on the flirtation of the maps that I've seen here in the state of South Carolina.
So historically, we're going to go back and have our constitutional lesson real quick, because lines are always redrawn every 10 years, because constitutionally they are required to do a census. And based upon that, based upon the population and the population shifts that take place, we have to redraw lines so that our representatives and our senators have as equal a population as possible. There are 5.1 million people in South Carolina, JR. There are 46 senators. If you do the math on that real quick, each of them have to represent about 115,000 people. And right now you've got some who are representing 90, some who are representing 150,000. And so that's why these lines get redrawn. And they do this every 10 years like clockwork, because it's in the U.S. Constitution.
Antoine, what are you hearing? Are there some lawmakers over at the State House that may put up a fight when it comes to this?
In particular on the Democratic side, because what's going to happen is the Republican majority in the state legislature here in South Carolina, they're going to pack a bunch of Republicans in their seats to maintain their majority, their power, and their influence, and limit the number of competitive seats for Democrats to potentially have a chance at taking back. And so siphon off a few Democratic seats to check a box, expand or strengthen the Republican majority, and call that redistricting 2021. And I think that's why you're going to see a fight. That's why you're going to see an effort. Likely we'll see some lawsuits to make the process as fair and balanced as possible. I think that we should all have potential to make almost every seat in the state of South Carolina competitive, because competition drives the marketplace. It encourages participation.
I know one of the headlines out of all this, Dave, is that the Senate seat currently held by Dick Harpootlian would no longer exist here in Richland County. The redrawing of these lines, is it going to affect anybody's power when it comes to our congressional districts?
You have to look at the fact that all 7 congressional districts are going to be redrawn in this same instance. You have the House that's working on the version of the House of Representatives, the Senate in South Carolina doing the same thing, but together they're going to have to work on a version of the new congressional map. How do we map out those 7 districts in South Carolina? We didn't gain a seat this time around. We gained one last time. And projections are we're most likely going to gain one in 2030 with the way population shifts are going right now. But there's going to be some question as to which precincts and which counties and which areas are going to be serviced by which members of the U.S. House of Representatives. And that's an important thing to keep in mind as we look at which parts of which counties and which communities are going to be included in those, because as it stands right now, we've got 6 Republicans and 1 Democrat, and that 1 Democrat is probably one of the most powerful members of the U.S. House of Representatives in James Clyburn.
I want to move on to last night's election here in the city of Columbia. Dave, is it a surprise to you that in the current political climate, the city of Columbia, which has been predominantly Democrat, predominantly blue for many, many, many years, has now gone red with a Republican mayor?
I think what you're seeing right now is there is a push that's being done right now in the local level to get more people involved in the process. And when that happens, you don't have a small group of folks who are making those decisions. I mean, we had a pretty decent sized turnout on that runoff election last night. And I think when you look at that, that's a real statement that you've got an energy that exists right now in the city of Columbia that says, listen, we want to be engaged in what's happening in city politics. And they actually turned out last night.
Antoine, how worried are you for the midterms next year?
I'm not worried at all, because the city of Columbia, like most cities and towns across South Carolina, are nonpartisan elections. So they're not Democrat versus Republican. Now, have some of the elected officials that have been elected, have they declared their political place of choice? Absolutely. But the elections are nonpartisan. The participation was fairly decent wasn't what it probably should have been. As a result, the elections played out the way they did, both at large and at the mayoral election. I congratulate our mayor-elect, Daniel Rickman. I hope that you will do everything you can to bring the city together. I think that this is not a reflection of the midterms. I think this is a reflection of a smaller body within the political ecosystem, and the people of Columbia decided they wanted Mr. Rickman over Councilwoman Devine. And I think we all have to shift our focus to make sure we work together for the best interests of Columbia.
But Antoine, it's the worst kept secret in town that Tamika Isaac Devine was a Democrat and Daniel Rickman a Republican. And following the endorsement of former President Obama and the endorsement of 6th District Congressman Jim Clyburn, Devine did not get the job done yesterday. That has to be a concern to you, isn't it?
Every election is different, and people vote for people for different reasons. I think that you can argue that low turnout in certain communities was part of the reason why Mr. Rickman won. You can argue that high turnout in certain reasons was the reason he came across the finish line first. I don't care who endorsed who. At the end of the day, endorsements are like this, and Dave and I talk about this all the time. They bring out some of your friends, and they rest assured will bring out most of your enemies. And who knows how all of those things played out. Mr. Rickman was leading going into the runoff with 40-some-odd%, so it was no surprising that he would have an easier runway starting this race off.
And I think when you take a look at the fact that Tamika Isaac Devine did turn around and she did get the endorsement of Jim Clyburn. She did get the endorsement of Steve Benjamin, Sam Johnson, Barack Obama coming out. I think it is a statement that those did not energize that base to turn out like the base turned out for Daniel Rickman. And I think the energy was there for Daniel. It wasn't there for Tamika Isaac Devine. And I think that's why we have the results that we have right now in the city of Columbia.
All right. Anything to this audit that turned up no discrepancies earlier today? Have you guys hearing anything on that?
I have not. We have to get this election right, these elections right, because that is the most trusted thing we have in a democracy. And I know no election will ever be perfect, but we've got to get as close to perfection as problem. And I won't attack any individual like we saw several years ago when we had election issues in our county. But we definitely have to take a look at the process and make sure we get this process right, because in a small city elections, we have to minimize mistakes to keep the trust of the people that their vote counts and it matters.
I think this is a place where we are going to be having a discussion as we get into the 2022 legislative session, talking about the election reforms that need to take place, because there are going to be requirements based upon what we're hearing right now for automatic audits to be done of certain precincts in every single county, and bringing some level of standardization across the board, because the way that elections are run right now in Lexington are completely different than sometimes the way they're run across the river in Richland County. And we've got to create that level of stability, as Antoine said, so that we can ensure that the vote is secure and the vote is accurate.
Dave, let me say one thing, because I don't want to send a message to our viewers that certain communities have better elections than others. We've seen election issues all around the state, regardless of where they are. No election is perfect. And I guarantee you, if we really pull the skin back in Lexington or even some of the more affluent areas in our state, we will find some dirty spot on the window when it comes to our elections. I just think we have to make certain that we get it right. Every jurisdiction does their elections different. Their process is different, and we will always find errors, but we have to limit those errors.
Need to wrap things up there. Dave Wilson, Antoine Seawright, guys, again, thank you so very much for your time.